the problems that Paul is now dealing with in his letter.
Ah.
Yeah.
That's actually, I think we had a question that acts as a good segue into that, which is, can you explain Galatians 2:15 through 21?
Yeah, I got it pulled up. 15 through 21. I'll just read it.
Mm-hmm.
Galatians 2, verses 15 all the way to 21. This is the Tree of Life version. We are Jews by birth and not sinners from among the Gentiles. That's a very interesting phrase, by the way. I've got some comment on that. But anyway, yet we know that a person is set right not by deeds based on Torah, but rather through putting trust in Messiah Yeshua. So even we have put our trust in Messiah Yeshua in order that we might be set right based on trust in Messiah and not by deeds based on Torah, because no human will be justified by deeds on Torah. But if, while seeking to be justified in Messiah, we ourselves also were found to be sinners, is Messiah then an agent of sin? Chas v'shalom, may it never be. For if I rebuild the very things I tore down, I prove myself to be a lawbreaker. For through the law I died to the law so that I might live for God. I have been crucified with Messiah. And it is no longer I who live, but Messiah lives in me. And the life I now live in the body, I live by trusting in the Son of God, who loves me and gave himself up for me. I do not nullify the grace of God, for if righteousness comes through Torah, then the Messiah died for nothing. Okay.
So it's interesting, right? Because in that, it sounds like what Paul is saying is that the byproduct of faith is that the person that he was, right, is no longer. And he's now a new being, a new creation, right? A new person as a result of faith. Is that kind of how that reads to you?
Sort of like a rebirth.
You know, almost like a conversion.
Almost like a conversion. So the background we're trying to give here is that the entire book of Galatians is concerned with one topic, and that's conversion. That's why we're given all this detail about like why one would want to convert and everything, because that's the question, right? These Gentiles are feeling the pressure, and these influencers are like, dude, you're already there, right? You're already Torah observant, you're keeping kosher, you're here on the Sabbath. Why don't you just go ahead, man, make the leap, do it. It'll be easier. You'll be protected by Roman law. You'll be counted in a minion. You know, like it's kind of this. That's the influence that they likely have. And so, and one thing, you know, people's righteousness is not based on deeds of the Torah, for no one will be justified. Justified is actually, it's not righteousness, it's justified. There's a difference. No one will be justified by the deeds of the Torah. Yeah, that's true. You know, even Jews wouldn't argue that point. That makes sense. Yeah, you know, everyone sins at some point in their life. And yeah, you don't do Torah to seek justification for yourself. Right. You actually get justification in one of two ways. In the Jewish way, that's the merit of the fathers. You're basically, you know, you're justified because God loves you, right? That's grace. Believe it or not, Judaism teaches grace.
But it's funny because Paul seems to also mention something very similar to the merit of the fathers in Romans 4.
Yeah.
Right?
You got that pulled up?
Yes. Romans 4, starting in verse 9. And I believe this is the ESV. Is this blessing then only for the circumcised or also for the uncircumcised? For we say that faith was counted to Abraham as righteousness. How then was it counted to him? Was it before or after he had been circumcised? It was not after, but before he was circumcised. He received the sign of circumcision as a seal of the righteousness that he had by faith while he was still uncircumcised. The purpose was to make him the father of all who believe without being circumcised.
Which is actually...
It's a very merit of the fathers statement.
Yeah. And that's actually why proselytes back in this time get called when they convert, they take on the new name Ben Avraham, son of Abraham, because you believed before you were circumcised. Like your process of belief began way before the process of conversion began, and now you're a convert and you need a Jewish name. And Abraham was promised a nation, to be a father of many nations. So if you're from among the nations, you would be a son of Abraham. That would make Abraham your father, because he's the father of the uncircumcised who believe. So do you see the process here? Do you see where this is making sense? You look like you had something to say.
Yeah, it's funny. It reminds me of a conversation that I had with a dear friend who, you know, brought on a good puzzling question regarding conversion, right? Because, you know, there are some schools of thought that take the extremity of conversion to the point where, like, you know, you can't really hug your mother anymore after you convert, because she's no longer your mother, because you're not that person anymore, right? You're completely different. Mm-hmm. But you know, one thing he pointed out is that you are, you know, a different person, but you're not. Like, your genetics are still the same genetics at the end of the day. You know, and so the question of birthdays comes up, and you know, is your birthday still the same at that point? Because you're still the same age. And this kind of segued the conversation into him explaining that, like, the conversion really is solely for the body. It's not for the soul, because the idea here is that the neshama was already present at this point, right? We're speaking about a Gentile who already had a Jewish soul, according to Jewish philosophy. It's already present. It's always been there. It, like, has always been a part of them. Their body just has not undergone the process of catching up with the soul in that aspect. So yeah, it reminded me of that conversation, and it's a beautiful concept. Because, I mean, if you think about that, what are the possibilities? How many nishmat, right, are out there having yet to undergo conversion? And this is a question I would love to discuss with he and Jewability and a few of our other Jewish friends. Right,
we definitely could do that, actually, because we plan to have a Noahide episode with them anyway. So, you know, that comes into question, which is a different episode we'll go over with Paul in Better Call Paul. But so what is, real quick, just before we move on, if I rebuild the very things I tore down, I prove myself a lawbreaker. You know, that is a weird statement. First of all, even if you are anomian, right, you're against the Torah observance, proving yourself a lawbreaker, right? So he's still upholding the standard, is sort of what it seems. The rebuilding of what he's tearing down is this idea that you can rely solely on your status as a Jew for salvation, which, again, part of what we're dealing with here is that the people, and this will segue back right into where we were going with this. A lot of people believe that that the only way for them to be saved is to do the full conversion process. So that's part of what Paul is combating here. Excuse me. Let's see here. Yeah. So it's this idea that you cannot be saved. You cannot have a place in the world to come until you do the conversion process. That's a problem. Paul doesn't believe this. Paul believes that there's obviously a place in the world to come, even for Gentiles, whether they convert or don't. So Paul is trying to not only combat this us versus them mentality, right? That Gentiles should feel way more included than they are. These cliques shouldn't exist. He's trying to stop this massive separation, right? The tearing down of the wall, so to speak, to kind of reintegrate. What you got?
I was gonna say, the part of the most, like, the most confusing aspect about this conversation, particularly with respect to Galatians and what we just read from Galatians, that I think will bring some clarity. And this is why I kind of outlined that, like, what we just read from Galatians it seems like Paul is already describing the results of a conversion, right? And the reason being, right, the question's a little misleading. The question, okay, should you or should you not convert? That's actually not the problem that Paul is dealing with. The problem Paul is dealing with is what qualifies as conversion.
Yes.
It's not whether or not you should. It's a foregone conclusion for Paul. For Paul, if you have faith and have undergone a mikvah, this is a conversion, right? That's the whole point of what he's explaining, is that this is his model of what he believes qualifies as a conversion. What he is combating is an alternative version of what conversion was.
Yes.
And that, that's a dispute that was ongoing during
at
this
the time. And just in its context, right? Earlier in chapter 2, we're talking about Peter hanging out with a bunch of other Gentiles, and then the influencers show up and he separates himself from the Gentiles again. So he goes basically what he's saying is Peter and Gentiles and they were all like hanging out together and all things were cool. They were rubbing elbows, eating food together. And then they show up from these other people show up from James, and then they're like, oh, none of that. And Paul's like, well, hold on. And so it's in light of that conversation that he just got done talking about. Is like, we need to consider them as members of the community. And if we keep pressuring them that they have to convert in order to be full-fledged members, then you're a hypocrite, because back in Acts chapter 10, you just told us that these Gentiles received salvation the same way we did, and they hadn't gotten circumcision yet. So what's your problem, my guy?
Let me tell you what it's like. And this will bring it in, and not to get political, but this will bring it to a level that's very relatable for everybody in America. And as you and I can both speak to this, since we're both first-generation Americans. Our fathers had to go through a pretty rigorous process to become Americans when they did. My father, especially becoming an American citizen from Cuba during the Cold War, right?
Yeah.
This was not easy.
Yeah. I think you had it harder than me. My dad at least joined the military, and so he like got all of his classes and fire hose version through the military. So.
Yep. But so they had to learn American history to a degree that the average graduating high schooler today could not compete with them in knowledge of American history. They had to learn English. There were many hoops to go through. So the prospect of changing the process to become an American citizen to simply recite the American's Creed and sign your name on this sheet of paper, now you're an American, right? That to somebody who has gone through that rigorous process seems like it's cheating the system. Yeah. Right? Because they had to go through so much more just to have the same status, and this person's getting let in real easy. And that's kind of the struggle that we're witnessing here at this point. You've got some people who have converted to Judaism, and they've had to undergo this rigorous process. And here's Paul saying, "Hey, look, like
y'all gotta do that."
right. The faith of Abraham, and undergo a mikvah. That you're there, right? It seems unfair.
Yeah, the workers who were there all day got paid the same amount as the workers who had just showed up, and they're a little mad about that.
Ooh.